Okay, welcome back to my channel. My name is Daniel. I am the owner of the Ramanford School of Arts, and you are currently watching me unwrap a linen panel canvas. I love working on these, and what we're going to be doing today is working on a landscape. So I'm going to be teaching you guys how to work in oil. I've taken the cellophane off, and now I'm sanding it down. I'm using a 150 grit sanding block, which I really like. I found that to be perfect for sanding it, and the perfect grit, I should say, for sanding it. And now I'm adjusting my canvas to my eye level, so I'm bringing it right about the center of where my nose is. I always start with drawing out very basic shapes, some of the most fundamental shapes that I can find, and I do that by squinting at the objects and looking to see what things stand out when I squint. So right about there, I'm determining where that shrubbery and those trees end. So I'm trying to get that figured out. And going over my lines, making sure that they're nice and strong and that they follow a clear, distinctive path. Those lines are really important because your eye will follow those lines. So as I continue to draw, you'll see how that influences everything. I'm placing a bush there and just kind of making a distinction between one colored tree versus the bush, and then another smaller bush that's right next to it. So I'm looking around, just trying to see what are the core elements. Now comes in a mountain that's in the mid-ground. More of a hill than a mountain, but basically some of the mid-ground items. And I actually don't think of them as mountains or trees or anything like that. I'm just thinking of them more as objects, because that's what they are to me. They're objects that have a very specific shape, that have a very specific form. So I'm continuing now with my shapes and looking carefully to see what angles look like. I often use my pencil to line up my angles against the object. So it doesn't make a difference if you're looking at a photograph or if you're outside looking in real life. With a photograph, the advantage is it's already in 2D. But if you're outside, all you need to do is just squint one eye, and all of a sudden everything looks 2D. So that way you get your angles pretty accurate. And I'm moving now into the background and just trying to get some of those background mountains in there. And just kind of getting an idea of design. I'm really concerned with design in the beginning stages. What does the overall shape and patterns of the objects look like? So as I'm continuing with this, I'm looking carefully at where some of these clouds show up. And it's not so important to me to get perfect lines. I just need an approximate idea of where things land. All of that fine-tuning, refining, that all happens at the end. I think a lot of people think of painting and drawing as a very precise activity, and that's true, but only towards the end. In the beginning stages, you want to keep things loose and fluid. It's very important that you get the overall concept down before you start to finalize and add detail. That's one of the big mistakes that I see most students make, especially beginner students, is that they think they need to make it perfect the first draft. And that's really not how it works. It's continual drafts that you layer upon one another and develop your idea and develop your colors and all of the detail. So my only goal and ambition as I draw this all out is to just get a rough concept of where things belong. So now I'm going to be using Workable Fixative. This is a fantastic product that you're going to spray right on top of the canvas. So you never want to do this indoors. You want to go outside, put this against a firm object so that it doesn't blow in the wind, and then go side to side and then up and down. So I do about 3 layers. Once side to side, once up and down, and then once again side to side. And then having done that, we're going to pick out our colors. So the colors that I'm seeing is titanium white, yellow ochre, cadmium red, viridian, ultramarine blue, dioxanized purple, and Van Dyke brown. Those are the colors that I'm seeing. So a lot of you may be asking, well, how did you figure that out? And honestly, that just comes from practice. It's good to have color theory, but the bottom line is until you actually work with the colors yourself, you really won't know what colors you need when you're looking at an object. The core thing that I'm looking for as I put in all of these colors are values, how light and dark things are going to be. That's really important for me, is to figure out the overall lightness and darkness of the object. Now I'm checking to see if the fixative is dry. There is a little bit of smudging, but it looks like it works. So I'm now going to be picking out my brushes. So I look carefully to see what brush is going to work for me, and it looks like this one is ideal. So this is a size 4. It's a bristle brush, and works out brilliantly for me. Using some brown, some red, and a little bit of yellow. I'm going to be mixing up this color and really thinning it down with my paint thinner. So I want a nice thin wash, and that's going to go right across the entire canvas. So as I add all of these colors in, or this specific wash in, I'm thinking about what my next steps are, how I'm going to start, where I'm going to place my tones and all that stuff. So getting down this initial wash is important because I get rid of the white. The white's way too strong, way too intense for me, and it's just overwhelming. So I'm going to use a napkin to further wipe it down, and it should literally dry in 10 minutes. If it's not drying in 10 minutes, then what that means is you've added way too much paint. So you should have something that's the consistency of watercolor. So now I wipe down my palette, get that all cleaned up so that I can start to move into my block-in phase. So my block-in phase, I'm going to just literally block out where I see color. So in this stage, what I basically focus on is, again, value and color, of course, but I just want to get in a rough concept of roughly the right color in the right place. And what you'll notice in just a few minutes is that I am squinting. I am doing a lot of squinting. So there I am squinting at this student of mine in the background. You want to really tighten your eyes and really lock down on what am I seeing on a global level, on the largest scale possible. So the biggest block of color that I can find. And I'm averaging the color out. I'm not looking at all the different details. I'm just looking to see how light and bright it is, and what the overall size and shape of that color is. So I'm blocking this all in. I notice it's a little bit darker on the corners, so I'm just going to get in some of that purple, having gotten the larger shape in. So I'm just going to speed this up so that I can get to the color mixing. And there it is. So I'm adding now a green into my color, which is going to neutralize it. And it's going to darken the color a bit and give it a little bit more of a bluer tint. The reason is because that particular green that I'm using has a ton of blue. So it kind of grays it down and cools it down. So that's where you get that kind of cool gray lavender tone. I'm going to continue with the sky here and just get in a good solid block in. I'm totally unconcerned with whether my shapes are exact, whether my color is exact. The rule is to get approximately the right colors in the right place. All of the fine tuning happens at the end, and I can't stress this enough. It doesn't matter what level you are as an artist, you want to do all of your fine tuning at the end. And the reason for that is because it all exists in context. Nothing exists in isolation. You're not going to be able to paint the sky perfectly and then move into your mountains and then discover that your sky is too dark or too light or the shapes are wrong. It always has to be judged with all the other stuff next to it. So the best strategy, hands down, is going to be to develop your painting cohesively. You're going to develop all parts of your painting together, going draft by draft by draft. So a very famous expression is, good writing is rewriting. Good painting is repainting. You're going to be adding paint on top, fixing things, adjusting things. That's the way you want to think about it. So this is why in the early stages, all I'm looking to do is just block in color. So exactly what you're seeing here in front of you, blocking it in piece by piece. So I'm adding in some orange and red here as I move into some of the warmer mountains that are closer to me. So I'm noticing my color is a bit too thin, so I'm adding in a little bit more paint to thicken the color up and make sure that I'm getting a tone that is close to what I'm seeing. Now again, I've sped this all up for the sake of keeping the video short. I don't want to bore you guys with slow brush strokes. But I encourage you guys to take your time in this stage. You really want to think about painting a lot like a train. In the beginning stages, it moves very slowly and it slowly picks up speed. So you want to really go slow in the beginning stages. And the reason for that is that you're planning everything out and setting up everything for the rest of the painting. So if you rush in the beginning, the chances of the painting starting to fall apart as you move into the middle and final stages is very high. But if you take your time in the beginning stages, I've always found that to be the best strategy for me to avoid problems later on. So I'm looking carefully, seeing if I've got more or less the right shape, more or less the right color, more or less the right value. So I'm going through this, getting in some darker purple tones, the mountains that are in the mid-range, right? So with every landscape painting, you're going to have your background, your midground, and your foreground. So now I'm focused on the midground. And notice that I'm more or less working from off into the distance, my background, then slowly moving into my midground. And as you'll see in the rest of the video, I move closer and closer towards the front, where basically the foreground is the last thing that I actually paint in. So now moving in closer into the midground, right at the cusp, I'm adding in these bushes that I see. They're cool green. I'm going to block them in. Notice that I'm totally unconcerned with the brush stroke. I'm just trying to get the right values. And the general rule in landscape painting is things that are closest to you are going to be richer and darker. Things that are further away are going to be lighter and cooler. So one phrase that one of our teachers use is cotton candy in the background, jewel tone in the front. So that might be a good rule of thumb for you guys. Okay, so the mid-tone is coming in with that orange mixture that I put in, and moving into the mid-tone mountains. Again, a relatively warm color that I'm seeing. Adding white actually cools it down. So there's some of the lighter colors. And now that I have my dark tree colors in, I'm already thinking about moving into the light green colors. So I'm using the same pile of paint because it's pretty close in color. I'm going in with these light greens. And all of that is going to go basically everywhere where I see shrubbery that's been left, because that's all that's really left. The last thing is going to be the foreground, which will just be a couple of strokes. And that's it. That's basically my process in terms of blocking out my landscape. Next time we're going to be putting in all the detail and fine-tuning. But as you can see, a few more strokes is going to pretty much finish this piece. No detail needed, just a little bit of color that signifies the average color of that space in front, and I'm done.